Alright, where to start with this one? Of course, with it being a series of 5 novels, 4 that can actually be read, as Butler made sure one was discontinued as she herself did not like the novel. When it comes to science fiction, Octavia E. Butler may not be as brought up as often as, say, someone like Asimov or Clarke. But the reasons for this is not a comment on her ability to write science fiction on a level with many who helped define the genre, but more a comment on her ability to recognize the common tropes and expand them into a reality more familiar with additional modern elements, showing further that there are few closed doors and more open windows when it comes to the genre. Having said this, one element that sci-fi has always stayed true to is having a substantial focus on an ethical or philosophical deviation from the story within. And Octavia Butler holds the standard that science fiction readers have come to expect. Today we'll be looking at some of the ideas found in the Patternist series while examining some of the characters that question what it means to be human while maintaining a standard of moral ethics despite the odds of survival, often asking if existence is more important than preserving the humanity within. The Patternist series begins chronologically with Wild Seed, in which we have who will become the antagonist, Doro, meeting a young shapeshifter of only 300 years old named Enyanwu. And I say young in comparison to Doro's age, which is roughly 4,000 years. Doro is, in fact, a spirit descended from the pharaohs of Egypt who has maintained his immortality by jumping from body to body. Enyanwu gets close to Doro only to later find out that he has plans of his own to create a society of beings with capabilities such as telepathy and other psychic abilities. A power struggle ensues between Enyanwu and Doro over who it is that has control over their own lives. Up until, that is, when Doro begins to help with the transition of a telepath that doesn't quite make it, taking out Doro's son, Isaac, in the process, whom Doro had also ordered Enyanwu to marry. You know, there's a lot going on here, so I'm just going to quickly sum it up. Doro is a spirit who jumps from body to body, finding others who have special abilities, and begins what he calls seed colonies. When he meets Enyanwu, he sees in her high potential to carry many children and grow one of these colonies exponentially. But Doro is too much of a control freak, leaving Enyanwu no other option but to become a dolphin. Wait, what? Now, we get into the second novel of the series, Mind of My Mind. In the near future of 1978, we have Doro, who has nearly completed his goals of creating a society of extremely powerful telepaths. To what greater purpose? Anyway, Doro's masterpiece, if you will, is a young telepath named Mary, whom Doro becomes increasingly worried about as she possesses powers that work far beyond his own. Also, Enyanwu no longer feels the need to turn into a dolphin and goes by the name Emma, and is on better terms with Doro. Why? Well, we'll get into that later. Now we head a bit further into the future of 1985. The third novel, chronologically, Clay's Arc, is split into 2 timelines, each chapter taking its turn from past to present to past back to present, which may sound confusing, but trust me, it is. Now, when reading this novel, you may wonder how it fits in with the Patternist series at all, if reading chronologically, but don't worry, I assure you it answers nothing, and therefore no need to question. Well, that's not completely true. There is a single mention on one page in which lets the reader know that you are at least in the same universe. However, we do begin to see the connection when we get to the final novel of the series, Patternmaster. A novel that shoots way further into the future, in which we are given this dystopian society that's split up into two separate classes, the Clayarchs and the highly functioning telepaths. As everyone that has read this series will know that the first two novels differ drastically from the following two, at least as far as story goes, and characters, and, well, pretty much everything. So let's start by taking a look at a few of the characters here, that of Yanwu and the main protagonist of the first two novels, Doro. Yanwu represents a struggle that far passes any personal gain or even a central concern for her own life. Throughout the novel Wild Seed, Doro suggests veiled, sometimes straightforward threats against her family, her children, and just everyone that she seems to care for. Her primary focus for her survival is to not only maintain her individualism, but the survival for her kindred. In this sense, her and Doro are not so different and seem to be two sides of the same coin. Whereas Yanwu suffers to maintain her family, others must suffer for Doro to obtain his goals in achieving a society of his people. Doro is an interesting study, setting up systems of social control, placing people in disciplinary situations to exert his power. He essentially builds dystopian communes with cultish elements intertwined with a firm grasp of what Michel Foucault describes as disciplinary societies. A society that is not necessarily disciplined, but disciplinary, meaning at any moment Doro can exercise his authority. And that fact is well instilled in every inhabitant of his seed colonies. Now, there could be a whole video on that alone, but I don't think too many people are as interested in looking at Wild Seed through the lens of discipline and punish. A much better example of this would be found with Mary in Mind of My Mind. As she is capable of reading any mind she likes, she perfectly exemplifies Michel Foucault's metaphor of the panopticon and how the prison system works. But that'll be for another time. When Yanwu decides to transform into a dolphin in an attempt to leave Doro, a long search begins in which Doro later finds Yanwu, who has started a colony of her own. Here is where you can really see that they have similar goals within these colonies they have established. So what is it that makes Yanwu a strong heroine and Doro a despised antagonist? There's really only one characteristic that separates these two, but it's enough to drive a world of differences between them. And that is that Yanwu has a sense of apathy. Whereas Doro ran his colonies as a dictator willing to kill anyone when they no longer served a purpose, and Yanwu cherished life and only killed when it was necessary to save others. At the end of Wild Seed, Doro does seem to have a slight change of heart after seeing the way Yanwu cared for her own people, which would explain why they are on better terms in Mind of My Mind. Though Doro does seem to be back to his ruthless ways in the second novel, it is more focused toward a goal, one in which he is close in achieving with the heroine Mary. Now, as to not have this video as long as it could be, I want to take a quick look at the final novel in the series. Though it was the first to be published, it is the last chronologically. And though from what I have seen it is the most criticized of the four novels, I want to talk quickly on why it is actually the most profound. Firstly, since this was the first to be published, one can appreciate the fact that Octavia Butler had planned the history for Patternmaster so coherently that if it weren't for this novel, Clay's Ark, a novel about a disease brought back from space that has potential to wipe out the human race, would be seen as a standalone novel. And though it did sound like I may have been poking fun at the series when giving a quick synopsis with its seemingly random jump scenes and oddities, Octavia Butler did something very different with this story in that the series is not the story of Doro or Enyanwu or Mary or Blake Maslin from Clay's Ark. But what she does is give a world history of the world found in Patternmaster. The dystopian future found in this novel has society divided into many different sectors and classes. A race of telepaths whose origin story is the incidents that end Mind of My Mind, and the Clayarchs whose origin story is, of course, presented in Clay's Ark. But before we get to the dystopian future in Patternmaster, at the base of it all, the genesis of the story, the Adam and Eve of the universe Butler has created, of course begins with Doro finding Enyanwu in Wildseed. The reason Patternmaster may be my personal favorite of the four, despite the prose not being on par with the other three, is because it is the first three that is really telling the story of why the world in Patternmaster is the way it is. Similar to the world we live in now, our present can only be understood through an understanding of our history. Well, I hope you enjoyed that short introduction to Butler's Patternist Series. The series tackles a lot of important themes and issues that have been written on repeatedly, so I'll provide links to all the critical elements found throughout the books in the description below. But if you did like this video, be sure to hit like and subscribe to see more content like this every Tuesday, and yeah, I hope to see you again.